When a test screening goes badly, studios tend to panic. Movies get torn apart, entire sequences get reshot, runtimes get slashed, and suddenly half the film looks nothing like what the director originally made. Which always raises the same question. Are test audiences actually helping these movies, or are they ruining them? After all, we've all heard stories about films that got butchered after bad test screenings. Sometimes the later director's cut ends up being the version fans prefer. But here's the thing. Every major studio movie gets tested. Even movies that audiences eventually love. Take The Shawshank Redemption. After test screenings, the filmmakers went back and shot additional scenes between the main characters and completely reworked the ending. Originally, there was no happy ending at all. James Cameron did something similar with Titanic. After showing an early 5-hour version to a test audience, he cut roughly 90 minutes from the movie and changed the ending. The result? Titanic became the highest-grossing film in history at the time. So today, let's look at a few movies that got absolutely hammered by test audiences. We're talking about films where a third of the movie, or sometimes even more, had to be completely rebuilt. And yet, instead of becoming disasters, they turned into major successes. Let's start with Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Doug Liman's action comedy had problems from the very beginning. Originally, the movie was supposed to star Brad Pitt and Nicole Kidman, but after the project spent forever stuck in development, Kidman eventually left because of scheduling conflicts. Pitt followed shortly after. Then Angelina Jolie joined the movie, and suddenly Brad Pitt was interested again. Once production finally got underway, another problem surfaced. Pitt had already committed to Ocean's 12. Apparently, he was paying very close attention to Angelina Jolie, and significantly less attention to his shooting schedule. After only a month of filming, production had to shut down for 3 months, so Pitt could go make Ocean's 12. Not exactly an ideal start. The constant delays, cast changes, and production shutdowns turned the screenplay into a moving target. Everybody seemed determined to rewrite something. According to various reports, the script was rewritten from scratch more than 50 times. Even during filming, it continued changing so much that at some point, nobody seemed entirely sure what movie they were making anymore. The results showed. The version that reached test audiences reportedly felt less like a movie and more like a collection of comedy sketches. Every scene seemed packed with jokes. Everybody was constantly trying to be funny, and the tone was all over the place. The good news? Audiences loved the chemistry between Pitt and Jolie. They also loved a certain very lengthy love scene. Ironically, most of that scene didn't survive into the final cut, but that wasn't because of the test audience. The MPAA apparently felt some of the material was a little too ambitious for a PG-13 rating. The studio panicked. The movie went back for extensive reshoots, huge chunks were cut, and the entire ending was rebuilt from scratch. The original finale had been much smaller and more intimate. There was also an ending involving the couple's child shooting a doll in the forehead that got removed completely. Most of the deleted footage didn't even make it into the director's cut, which is only 7 minutes longer than the theatrical version. Whether the movie became better or worse is impossible to know now. But one thing is certain. Whatever they did worked. Mr. and Mrs. Smith ended up grossing $487 million worldwide on a $110 million budget. A sequel remained on the table for years, but much like Hancock, it never came together. The stars became more expensive, their schedules became harder to coordinate, and every time the project seemed close to moving forward, somebody decided the script needed another rewrite. Eventually, time simply ran out. Now let's talk about Jaws. Today, Jaws is remembered as the movie that basically invented the modern blockbuster. It was the biggest hit of 1975 and helped turn summer into Hollywood's biggest movie season. But during production, the film was an absolute nightmare. The project came dangerously close to collapsing multiple times, and Steven Spielberg was constantly worried he was about to get fired. And when the studio wasn't thinking about firing him, Spielberg was thinking about quitting. According to Spielberg, the production was so chaotic that he could barely do his job. The studio saw him as an inexperienced young director who might be completely in over his head. Meanwhile, Spielberg wanted to escape because of 2 actors, Richard Dreyfuss and Robert Shaw. The reason their rivalry feels so believable on screen is because they genuinely couldn't stand each other in real life. The conflict mostly revolved around Shaw's drinking. Robert Shaw reportedly got drunk almost every day and then proceeded to annoy practically everyone around him. Cast members, crew members, it didn't matter. Nobody wanted to challenge him because he had a reputation for being extremely confrontational. Then one day, Shaw allegedly started loudly announcing that he wanted to quit drinking forever and that today would finally be the day he did it. According to the story, Richard Dreyfuss listened to this speech, walked over, grabbed the bottle out of Shaw's hand, and threw it into the ocean. That did not go well. Shaw reportedly exploded with rage, attacked Dreyfuss, and nearly strangled him. From that point on, every opportunity became an opportunity to make Dreyfuss miserable. Shaw mocked his performances, insulted him constantly, and occasionally even threw empty beer cans in his direction. Spielberg was only 28 years old at the time. There wasn't much he could do, and whenever he ran to the studio asking for help, executives basically shrugged and said, "Good luck." Eventually, all this chaos started affecting the movie itself. Spielberg later admitted that the constant drama pulled his attention away from the things he should have been focusing on. When the film was finally shown to test audiences, the reaction wasn't good. People thought the mechanical shark looked fake. They thought it looked slow, and worst of all, they thought it was funny. Spielberg listened carefully to the criticism and begged the studio for a chance to fix the movie. At that point, the executives figured they had nothing left to lose and gave him another $2 million. Spielberg went back and reshot almost every major shark sequence. In the original version, audiences saw the shark almost immediately. During attacks, it was constantly visible. Spielberg changed all of that. Now the shark would remain mostly hidden until the final stretch of the movie. And suddenly, the entire film worked. At the next test screenings, the laughter disappeared. It was replaced by screaming. Then John Williams' legendary score was added. According to one famous story, audiences reacted so strongly during one screening that part of the theater ceiling actually collapsed. Whether that story is true or not, the movie's success certainly was. Made for just $7 million, Jaws went on to earn roughly $470 million worldwide. It won 3 Academy Awards, including Oscars for sound and original score. And almost overnight, Steven Spielberg became one of the most powerful directors in Hollywood. World War Z is another great example of a movie that got hammered during test screenings, but still managed to become both a box office hit and a critical success. There is, however, one reason it never became an even bigger success, and that reason probably explains why we never got the sequel that was being planned for years. The problem was the reshoots. After negative reactions from test audiences, the studio ordered massive changes to the movie. Those changes eventually pushed the budget all the way up to $190 million. Now, yes, the film made about $540 million worldwide, but once you factor in marketing and all those extra production costs, the profit wasn't nearly as impressive as it looked on paper. And that made the studio nervous about spending hundreds of millions more on a sequel. What's especially fascinating is just how different the original ending was. Originally, the entire final third of the movie took place in Moscow. After leaving Israel, Brad Pitt's character was supposed to land in Russia, where things immediately went completely off the rails. According to reports, he gets detained by the KGB, loses his phone, loses his documents, gets drafted into the Russian military, and somehow ends up with a bottle of vodka and a pet bear. From there, things get even crazier. Over the course of several months, Pitt allegedly trains his bear for combat, climbs the military ranks, and becomes some kind of legendary zombie-fighting Russian war hero. Meanwhile, back in America, his wife, played by Mireille Nos, is living in a refugee camp and starts a relationship with a heroic action movie soldier, played by Matthew Fox. Eventually, Pitt defeats zombies in Moscow, heads back to America, rescues his wife, and settles his score with Matthew Fox. If that sounds completely insane, that's because it was. The original ending reportedly felt like somebody took every Hollywood stereotype about Russia, threw them into a blender, and built an action movie around whatever came out. And apparently, even American audiences thought it was a little much. Test audiences heavily criticized the entire Moscow storyline. But what they disliked even more was the subplot involving Pitt's wife leaving him for Matthew Fox. The studio looked at all of this and decided it had to go. So the movie went back for 2 months of reshoots. The Moscow storyline disappeared completely. Instead of landing in Russia, Pitt's plane now lands in Wales, where the movie transforms into a much smaller and more suspenseful finale. Rather than becoming a zombie-fighting military legend, Pitt spends the final act running through a medical facility, trying to solve the outbreak and develop a way to fight it. The new ending added another $50 million to the budget. Originally, the movie had reportedly been completed for around $140 million. For years, fans hoped the studio would eventually release the original version of the third act, but that never happened. So we'll probably never know whether the original ending was better or worse. But one thing is certain, it would have been absolutely unforgettable. Now let's finish with one more movie that owes a lot to test screenings. In fact, without this film, there's a very real chance Back to the Future never gets made. That movie is Romancing the Stone. The screenplay was written by Diane Thomas, who was working as a waitress at the time. When Michael Douglas read the script, he loved it so much that he paid her $250,000 for it. That's a huge amount of money for a first-time screenwriter even today. Then, things got even better. After the movie became a major success, Douglas thanked Thomas by buying her a Porsche. Tragically, just a few weeks before the release of The Jewel of the Nile, Thomas and her fiancée were killed in a car accident while driving that same car. Originally, Michael Douglas wasn't even planning to star in Romancing the Stone. His goal was to produce it, much like he had done with One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. The problem was that nobody wanted the lead role. At the time, many people viewed the project as little more than an Indiana Jones knockoff. Actors including Clint Eastwood, Christopher Reeve, Sylvester Stallone, and Jack Nicholson all passed on the movie. Eventually, Douglas looked around, realized nobody else wanted the job, and decided to play the lead himself. Then came the test screenings, and they were rough. Douglas was so worried about the movie's prospects that he reportedly told people he would quit acting if the film failed. But Robert Zemeckis had an even worse experience. The studio became so convinced the movie was going to flop that they removed him from another project he was supposed to direct, Cocoon. That movie eventually went to Ron Howard. After losing Cocoon, Zemeckis approached Douglas with a plan. According to Douglas, the ideas made sense. He convinced the studio to invest another $1 million in reshoots. The movie was cut by roughly 20 minutes. The opening and ending were reworked. Several new scenes were added, and one male publisher character was removed and replaced with a female character. Then the movie was shown to test audiences again. This time, the reaction was overwhelmingly positive. The gamble paid off. Made for just $10 million, Romancing the Stone earned $76 million domestically and became one of the biggest hits of the year. Michael Douglas became a major star, and Universal suddenly became very interested in Robert Zemeckis again. Interested enough, in fact, to finally greenlight a little project called Back to the Future. The funny part is that Zemeckis and Bob Gale had been pitching Back to the Future even before Romancing the Stone. Nobody wanted it. Then Romancing the Stone became a hit, and suddenly everybody wanted it. That experience left a lasting impression on Zemeckis. From that point forward, he personally attended test screenings for his movies. He talked to audience members, listened to their feedback, took notes, and often made changes based on what he heard. That's exactly how he approached films like Back to the Future and Forrest Gump. Ironically, Back to the Future has a famous reshoot story of its own, but that one wasn't caused by test audiences. Instead, it came from Steven Spielberg and Robert Zemeckis themselves. Halfway through production, they decided one of the actors simply wasn't right for the role, and made the incredibly expensive decision to start over. But that's a story I've already covered before. That was Frameback. Subscribe for more rewinds and see you on the next one.